Hello, you've tuned into State of Southasia, a podcast from Himal Southasian, where we have the best minds on the region to unpack crucial issues affecting our politics, cultures, environments, and societies. I'm your host, Nayantara Narayanan. It's Southasian Heritage Month, and we're asking you to become a paying supporter of Himal Southasian. We're on a mission to show you South Asia like no one else can. Himal is an independent magazine, completely free of government and corporate interests. You can support our in-depth journalism by becoming a paying patron for as little as $5 per month. Visit our website himalmag.com and click on Support Himal. Bhutan is making a big bet on its future. The small mountain kingdom is building a new city across 2,500 square kilometers of land on its border with India. This is the Mindfulness City at Geluphu, that the country is hoping to build into an economic hub with special infrastructure and its own international airport. It's an audacious plan. Bhutan is banking on the Geluphu Mindfulness City, or GMC, to revive its faltering economy while keeping to its national ideals of sustainability and gross national happiness. But the ambitious plan ignores some hard truths. The Bhutan government's announcements about the GMC and mainstream media coverage of the project in Bhutan and across the border in India make little mention of the fact that Geluphu was once home of the Lhotshampa, who are Nepali-speaking Bhutanese people who were expelled from the country in large numbers in the 1990s. I am joined today by Maximilian Morch, a writer and researcher who specializes in Asia's borderlands. And he's here to talk about the scale of the Mindfulness City, whether it's a distraction from the economic problems and the outmigration crisis in Bhutan, and how it hides the history of the Lhotshampa displacement. Max, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start off with the Mindfulness City when it was first announced. What Bhutan's pretext for building this city is, and really the scale of the project itself.
Sure. So the Geluphu Mindfulness City was officially unveiled back on the 17th of December 2023 on Bhutan's National Day. And it was announced by King Jigme Khesar Namgyal Wangchuk. And the city, which is going to be part of a special administrative region, was presented as really a grand developmental project, this transformative response to Bhutan's mountain economic and social challenges. So in his National Day address, the king himself said that the purpose of establishing this special administrative region is to create a vibrant economic hub by providing a conducive business environment and compelling incentives. It will be a mindfulness city encompassing conscious and sustainable business, inspired by Buddhist spiritual heritage, and distinguished by the uniqueness of the Bhutanese identity. And this project is really rooted in the country's guiding philosophy of gross national happiness. I mean, the official website from Geluphu Mindfulness City states it will be the world's first global model of regenerative, values-based urban development, one that's built for the prosperity and flourishing of future generations. But what actually is it? So Geluphu is located on the southern border of Bhutan, the border with India. It's one of the few parts of Bhutan which is flat, which is quite rare. It's one of the few regions of flat terrain within Bhutan, and as you mentioned, it's going to span over 1,000 square kilometers, 3 times the size of Singapore. Within the GMC, there's going to be a new international airport, a 45-kilometer rail link to Assam. There's going to be new hydropower dams. There's going to be new reservoirs, urban design for green technology, low-rise architecture, a new centers focused around bioscience, data centers, and education. And because it is a special administrative region, it's going to have slightly different legal system policy and policy implementation than the rest of Bhutan. Businesses that hope to operate in the city will be screened for alignment with Bhutanese values around sustainability, equality, and respect for national sovereignty. Why is this coming, and why is this coming now? Well, Bhutan, we'll get into, is in the midst of really the Bhutanese economy has been struggling for many years. And so, there's also been huge increases in outmigration, youth unemployment. And so this whole GMC project has been framed and designed to reverse the brain drain and revitalize the Bhutanese economy. but there are some really significant concerns about its impact, effectiveness, and actually how much substance there really is behind these very glossy plans.
Right. You spoke about how it's centered around mindfulness, equality, happiness, but all of this ignores the fact that Geluphu is one of the sites of the expulsion of the Lhotshampa people. This happened, of course, in the late 80s and 90s when hundreds of thousands of Nepali-speaking Bhutanese were expelled from Bhutan. They were deemed national security threats. Many of them have been living in refugee camps in Nepal. Many of them have been relocated to countries in the West, like the United States and Canada. And of course, in the history of Bhutan, while talking about happiness and equality, the Lhotshampas have been completely ignored. They have been ostracized, and their distress and displacement has not figured into this conversation about happiness and equality at all. And this continues with the GMC, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just to give a bit of a background, maybe for listeners who are not so familiar with the Lhotshampa. So they're an ethnic Nepali-speaking community who originally settled in southern Bhutan, exactly where the Mindfulness City is being built, including Geluphu, in around the mid-19th century. And I should say from the start, there's increasing contestation and kind of academic debate around the term Lhotshampa, which is Zonga for southerner. So increasingly, some are preferring to use the term Bhutanese Nepali rather than using a term that was a term in another language from a country that expelled them. So it's ongoing kind of contestations around the actual term itself. But regardless, the history is that many of the Bhutanese Nepalis or Lhotshampa in Bhutan were actually invited to work on state-sanctioned agriculture projects, timber extraction in the southern region. So they were invited by the ruling elite to Bhutan. Over time, they settled permanently. Geluphu was one of the largest sites of Lhotshampa residing in Bhutan. And they'd become really vital, central to the Bhutanese economy. By the 1980s, in the 1981 census, it was found that Lhotshampa were over 50% of Bhutan's population. And this is when things started to go wrong for them. So even a little bit earlier, by the 1970s, Bhutan had really undergone this cultural nationalism program, asserting the singular, rigid national identity. Zonga was the only language that could be used in school. Nepali language was not allowed to be used in schools or in government buildings. You had to wear traditional northern Bhutanese clothing. And then for the Lhotshampa, but many of them have a different religion, a different language, a different way of life. They found this was cultural erasure. Then in the 1980s, the new citizenship law required that anyone living in Bhutan prior to 1958 had to have written legal documentation. Many did not. Therefore, they were rendered stateless overnight. Then in the early 90s, in 1990, understandably, facing this increased marginalization, Lhotshampa had some peaceful protests, but the crackdown was really was disproportionate. They were demanding democratic reform, the restoration of citizenship, and being able to exercise their cultural and political rights. The state had a military crackdown. People were arrested, tortured, there was sexual violence, people were branded as anti-nationals, and they were deemed as militant insurgents. Thousands were detained, their homes were destroyed. Many people were arrested. After they were arrested, they returned home to find their house had been destroyed, and ultimately they were expelled from Bhutan. So between 1990 and 1992, over 100,000 Lhotshampa, almost 1/6 of Bhutan's population at the time, were expelled. They were denied refuge in India, and they ended up in eastern Nepal in 7 camps in southeastern Nepal run by UNHCR. Over the last few decades, the majority were ultimately resettled in third countries, primarily the United States, but also Canada or Australia. But now there's a couple of thousand who still live in 2 camps in Nepal. But conditions are really, really quite dire. UNHCR withdrew support back in 2017. So those refugees living in these 2 camps are almost entirely reliant on support from family members who have resettled. And again, within the camps, the population tends to be older. They tend to be communities who want to return to Bhutan one day. So maybe their sons, their daughters, their family have resettled, but they have remained in Nepal because they're so desperate to return home. And this is, as you mentioned, where things get really quite sad and quite upsetting. It's that there are refugees alive today in Nepal, you have land certificates for land in Geluphu. They own the land that the GMC is being built on. They have not been consulted. They have not had their concerns listened to. They are completely avoided from this debate. So they are the rightful owners of this land, but those concerns are being roughshod over. So really, for the Lhotshampa, this announcement of the GMC is incredibly painful because it is just yet another erosion of their identity, of their existence within Bhutan. And again, I think the most jarring thing of all is in the term GMC, that this is supposed to be a mindfulness city. This is supposed to be so-called values-based development, but I still don't know how do we square values-based development with ethnic cleansing.
Absolutely. And earlier this year in January, I spoke to Susan Banky on this podcast. She's been researching the subject of the Lhotshampa expulsion for many years, for almost 20 years, and has written a book called The Ecosystem of Exile Politics. So our listeners can go back and listen to that episode if they want to, really find out more about the continued distress of the Lhotshampas. But Max, I'd like to talk about Bhutan's economic situation with you. Bhutan's economy is really struggling. It's a small country, it's landlocked between India and China. And right now, there is a huge outmigration happening from Bhutan, which belies the country's emphasis on its core ideal of happiness. What do you make of this? Can you elaborate on the economic parameters, what's not working in Bhutan, and why are people leaving the country?
Sure. So outmigration in Bhutan is a real issue at the moment, particularly among educated and skilled individuals. So now an estimated 66,000 Bhutanese live abroad. That's almost 9% of the population. I mean, even just comparatively within Southasia, this is the highest by far. And what is really concerning is the majority of those leaving are both students, but also professionals of working age. So, for example, if we could compare to, let's say, Nepal or Bangladesh, the majority of labor migration are traditionally low-skilled and directed to the Gulf states. Bhutan's migration skews towards the middle class and educated. What that means, it has really dramatic implication for the country's service provision for the government. So, for example, in March 2025, the Ministry of Education announced that over 1,100 teaching vacancies would be filled not by new teachers, but by rehiring retired teachers. Many schools around the country had gone months without specialist subject teachers. In June last year, the Ministry of Health then revealed it has a shortage of 172 doctors and 824 nurses. A study from the same year found that actually 61% of Bhutanese nurses had been prescribing medicine without doctor supervision due to a lack of doctors. And so what is driving this migration? Outwards to seek better opportunities. Everyone surveyed, or most people surveying, saying, well, that's the income available in Bhutan is not high enough. There's a lack of opportunities. There's rampant nepotism within the public sector and a lack of opportunities. So this has not gone unnoticed. The Bhutanese Prime Minister, Shirin Tokbe, recently described this phenomenon as an existential threat. So the government has also launched the National Reintegration Program to encourage returnees to try and bring people back, reinvigorate the economy in Bhutan. But again, results of this have been poor at best. By May of this year, 560 Bhutanese had registered, only 170 had returned, and out of those 170, just 28 had actually found employment once back in Bhutan. So this is really quite concerning. But this is also directly related to Geluphu. So in October last year, the King and Queen of Bhutan made a visit to Australia. During their visit, they met with Bhutanese diaspora, and they shared or tried to sell the vision of the GMC. The King framed the project as part of this larger effort to secure a dignified and promising future for all Bhutanese citizens. But can Geluphu deliver the kind of jobs and professional opportunities that people want? Will it reverse this trend of outmigration? The other thing is the special economic zone, special administrative regions tend to actually have weaker worker rights and less employment protection. That's what makes them attractive for employers. But therefore, they're going to be less attractive for employees. So that is one thing around outmigration. The other is the economy, and again the repeated use of mindfulness when discussing development and politics within Bhutan. So just last month, I reviewed actually the enlightened leadership inside Bhutan's inspiring transition from monarchy to democracy by Prime Minister Shirin Tokpe for Himal Southasian. And throughout the book, the language of mindful governance, mindfulness is used almost on every page. So Tokpe writes about mindfulness, growth, national happiness, and he promotes a leadership philosophy based on mindfulness. So we need to have compassion, wisdom, and courage. And if we do that, we can, he says, build a strong, unified nation, one that thrives on a sense of wonder about experiences that evoke awe or beauty that bring people together. And again, in the book, he talks specifically about the GMC. He describes the GMC as a visionary city that transcends traditional urban development paradigms, advocating for a place designed not around market forces, but around principles of harmony, community, and ecological balance. But I think there's two important things within that quote there. One, where is the substance to this? If we're talking purely on a policy level, on an economic level, the government has not articulated how GMC will ensure economic stability, ethics, or equality. I mean, the use of this kind of mindfulness in Bhutan's almost this international unique selling point, right? This is very popular for tourists, but will it appeal for global investors and manufacturers? There's nothing I've seen so far around the policy, the frameworks, or the proposals around the GMC that is going to differentiate it from any of the many underperforming speculative zones around Asia. I think there's a tendency to fall back on SEG. Is this fix all problem? If we open an SEG, then the money will come, and actually it's all very easy. And back in Shenzhen in the 1980s, it was dramatically successful. There have been a few successful flexible economic zones around the world. The majority in Asia in recent years have promised a lot and massively under-delivered. And of course, southern Bhutan, yes, it's a much better, it's probably the most suitable place out of all in Bhutan to have big manufacturing, have big trade, because it is relatively flat, it is not mountainous. However, again, Bhutan is landlocked. All of the trade will have to go to India, and so far the actual size of Bhutan's export market is minimal. So without huge investment in infrastructure, transparency, labor protection, the GMC risks becoming another aspirational development zone that fails to deliver on promises. And again, the other point of what the Prime Minister was saying is that GMC is going to bring in, it's going to benefit market forces, it's going to bring in economic development, but it's also going to bring in harmony, community, and ecological balance. There's nothing in the plans that really tells me this is ecological balance. But again, going back to harmony, going back to the earlier point, there are people displaced from Geluphu to own this land. There is nothing harmonious, there's nothing communal about GMC when we're talking about the experiences of Lhotshampa communities.
Right. And I'd like to remind our listeners that they can read the review of that memoir of Bhutan's Prime Minister on the Himal website. The piece is called Planned Lessons and Careful Lies from Bhutan's Prime Minister. And it's a pretty scathing review of how he assesses his country. For more than 35 years now, Himal has been reporting on people and how they've been displaced in crises across South Asia. We bring you cross-border stories that you won't find anywhere else. And it takes a lot to do this kind of in-depth, independent journalism. We're relying on listeners like you. You can support the magazine by becoming a paying patron. Click on the link in the episode notes or go to our website, himalmag.com, and click Support Himal. You can also sign up to our newsletters to keep up with our latest stories, events, and more. Now back to our conversation with Maximilian Morch. Max, you've talked about the investment that will be needed for the GMC. And Bhutan really has been wooing India. India is a big part of this push. They're probably going to have a huge investment in the GMC. Bhutan's king and prime minister have made several trips to India as well, to states like Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh. And the state of Assam, that is on the border with the Mindfulness City, is also probably going to play a big part, is going to be a strategic partner in this project. But what I want to ask you is really about Bhutan's dependence on external aid, especially in the current climate. We know this year the US under President Donald Trump has frozen a lot of international aid, starting with the USAID program and many other humanitarian programs as well. How does this affect Bhutan's economy, first of all, and secondly, the plans for the GMC?
Mm. It's going to have a big impact, of course. I mean, Bhutan has long relied on foreign aid, most notably from India, which is still by far this largest bilateral donor, and partner, but also from the international community, the wider international community, to fund infrastructure, education, and developmental initiatives. The USAID has been funding and working in Bhutan since the 1980s. It supported a huge variety of programs from solar and hydropower development, smart energy training, cross-border cooperation with India, and other infrastructural projects. The suspension and eventual cancellation of USAID support under the Trump administration is the negatively impacted development work in Bhutan as it has around the world, from disaster management projects, the seed-mounted COVID-19 vaccines, the override scholarships. USAID had provided millions of dollars in annual assistance to Bhutan. That is now absent. The withdrawal has left a significant vacuum, and I think it's fair to say that no other developmental donor around the world are able to fill the gap left by the United States. It's going to take time to see the full impacts. I mean, on one aspect, compared to other countries in the region, let's say Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bhutan it doesn't have a humanitarian crisis. It's not relying on USAID to provide emergency humanitarian support. It's more long-term developmental. So on that way, around the region, and actually particularly in Myanmar, the withdrawal of USAID is having a massive humanitarian and political crisis. That is not the case so much, or it's not at that same level in Bhutan, but it will take time. And again, this means the Bhutanese government, in an economy that is really struggling, it's going to have to dig deep and find more money to fund the infrastructural development projects. It's left with a big hole in its finances I'm skeptical about how ready and available and I'm skeptical about how easy it will be for it to plug that hole.
Just coming to the gross national happiness index itself, at this point, how do you assess the GNH as a metric? Bhutan's reputation has been so linked to gross national happiness. And now there's this push for the mindfulness city. While all the rhetoric is still around gross national happiness, it's really an economic project, right? The question I have for you is this because Bhutan's people, can they consider themselves happy without a certain level of economic development? And is that why Bhutan is now talking about and has launched a gross national happiness index 2.0 with more emphasis on the economy? What's your assessment of this?
I mean, I think GNH is a really interesting model. It's been, on the one hand, incredibly successful as a marketing tool, as a PR strategy. If people around the world know one thing about Bhutan, that it is that a country of gross national happiness. It really has used that into its slogan. It's very important for attracting tourism, for the image of Bhutan. However, is it a developmental model or is it just a slogan? I think this is the tensions within it. It's gross national happiness was first envisaged back in 1972, but I don't think in the subsequent decades since then, over 5 decades since then, has Bhutan's political or economic model really diverged from those of other countries, even within Southasia. I don't think it has. We don't see a particularly unique form of economic growth or development that is more sustainable than other countries. So I think if we look at it as a symbolic function, this kind of idealistic branding strategy, it's been very, very successful for the past and the future. And I think, but in terms of the reality, it's really quite failed. I mean, even back in 2013, during his first Prime Minister Syrian Togbe said that basically, look, if the government of the day were to spend a disproportionate amount of time talking about GNH rather than delivering basic services, it's a defection. I mean, he explicitly mentioned 4 challenges that Bhutan faces: ballooning debt, rupee shortage, unemployment, and a growing sense of corruption. Those 4 things combined, gross national happiness has not found a solution to that yet. And so this is now, it's you mentioned, we're now hearing talk about cultural happiness 2.0. So this is a revised version that places more emphasis on economic growth. Top Bear has said that, Bhutan's been too conservative economically. It needs to correct that. So maybe we are seeing a little bit more engagement with market forces, a kind of a expansion of what cultural natural happiness means, and that maybe the model as a standalone isn't sufficient by itself. But I think the one thing that cultural natural happiness does allow Bhutan is that, look, around the world, around the region particularly, special economic zones are announced to not a huge amount of fanfare. They're often upheld by civil society. He rightly points out a whole list of environmental, social, political concerns. But that has not really happened so much with the GMC. In a way, the Bhutan, because of their support of gross national happiness, they have a little bit more credibility when pushing something like this. So I've been looking, well, not just social media, but commentary around GFC. And apart from those directly connected to Lhotshampa, to Bhutanese Nepalis, it has been overwhelmingly positive. And I do not think that a similar plan that had been introduced, let's say, in Nepal or Bangladesh, would have gotten as much press. So again, has it been a successful developmental model? What I would argue, even is a model, what does it actually stand for? There's not a lot of, it's a bit wishy-washy when you get into the specifics, right? There's never been a specific policy plan. They never said it's more like a list of things that are desirable as opposed to a robust framework for sustainable development. So in that case, hasn't really been useful, I don't know, but it's certainly generating a lot of goodwill and publicity and attracting potential investment. We will have to see.
But I guess also the gross national happiness does mask other things, right? Again, happiness is not just about doing well economically, but also about freedoms. In Bhutan, press freedom is low. People are generally not comfortable about speaking out against the government.
I mean, I think the press freedom within Bhutan is extremely concerning, and actually it's getting worse, and it's getting worse quite rapidly and quite dramatically. In the 2000, as you mentioned, the World Press Freedom Index in 2023 categorized Bhutan 152nd out of 180 countries. But in 2022, the year before, it was 33rd. So that's a tremendous backsliding. Within Southasia, only Afghanistan and Pakistan rank worse for media freedoms. So why is this the case? Well, there's a number of factors. The biggest one is state control over media. The largest newspaper in Bhutan is state-owned. State broadcaster doesn't have an editorial independent mandate. There's a big issue around legal intimidation. Defamation charges are routinely used for journalists and critics. There's a lot of surveillance domestically, but also within the diaspora. And what that means is people self-censor. People the risk of retaliation or professional consequences. There's been restrictions on foreign media in parts of Bhutan, particularly in the south. And I mean, even civil servants, they're not allowed to share information with the media, even if it's in the public interest. And what this ends up in is you have a climate of fear. So today there are over 30 political prisoners behind bars in Bhutan. Many of them, or some of them, have been detained for over 30 years. You've seen some enforced disappearances in the past of pro-democracy activists. There's been allegations of torture or treatment from people that who've arrested. People in prison have been denied food, denied eating, bedding. They've been denied access to legal representation and to their family visits. There's no independent monitoring that's been taking place in prisons in Bhutan in recent years. And yet, Bhutan continues to reject United Nations recommendations to ratify key international human rights treaties, including on both torture and for important disappearances and civil and political rights. The situation inside Bhutan is really quite dire. But again, yet you kind of come back to mindfulness and you think, actually, this is not civic repression. It's not something you picture when you think of Bhutan. And so actually, again, this mindfulness terms is able to deflect a lot of these criticisms And again, I am certain that if a similar project was used elsewhere, there would be a litany of news articles around, well, actually, hang on, is it ethical to invest in this country? Is it ethical to engage in a country with a history of oppression or state violence? Whereas in Bhutan, that hasn't really happened. And I really do think that the deployment of mindfulness as the barrier, as a PR advocacy exercise has been really quite successful in this case.
You certainly have to watch how the GMC progresses. Max, my final question to you is just for 3 recommendations. These could be books or movies or other podcasts, so that our listeners can better understand Bhutan, its history, its current predicaments, and maybe something about the GMC itself.
Yeah, I think one of the first piece I'll recommend is an article written in Scroll India in March this year, The Dark Shadows of Bhutan's Geluphu Mindfulness City project, and it's given by Suraj Puratokyu, and it's actually written by a Bhutanese Nepali about the project, memories of Geluphu, and the pain this project has caused within Lhotshampa, within Bhutanese Nepali communities. So that would be something I would highly recommend. The other one would be your podcast on Himal with Susan Pankey, the author of The Ecosystem of Exile Politics. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a very interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to reading her book in the coming weeks. And finally, it's a bit of an older suggestion. It's Becoming Citizens, Culture and Nationhood and the Plight of Refugees from Bhutan, which was written by Michael Hutt back in 2005. I found it a great introduction, but this is what I read many years ago when I first got interested in hearing stories from Lhotshampa and Bhutan Nepali communities. It contains a lot of interviews with diaspora and a lot of archival information. So it's a little bit dated now. It's 20 years old, but I always found that it was a great introduction to me to the situation, to the kind of the history and the contested narrative around it.
Super. Thank you so much, Max. And thank you for being here today and having this conversation.
Thank you, Adam.
That was Maximilian Morch on the State of Southasia podcast. You can find more stories from Bhutan and about the Lhotshampa on our website, himalmag.com. You can find Max's recommendations and all these stories in the episode notes. If you like this episode, leave us a comment or write to us at editorial@himalmag.com. Tell us what you want to hear about on this podcast. Don't forget to tune in to the Southasia Review of Books podcast with Himal's Shweta Shrikanthan and our special podcast series Partitions of the Heart, hosted by the peace activist Harsh Mandar. Follow the Himal South Asian podcast channel on your podcast app and find all our latest episodes. You can share, rate, and review them. You can also sign up to our newsletters to keep up with Himal's work. This episode was edited by Ritika Chauhan. We'll be back soon with another in-depth conversation on the next episode of State of South Asia with me, Nayantara Narayanan. Thank you for listening and see you then.